Government subsidies to corporations have long been a contentious issue in public policy. At their core, subsidies are financial incentives or direct payments provided by governments to businesses with the intention of fostering economic growth, supporting innovation, or achieving policy objectives such as environmental sustainability. However, critics argue that these subsidies are a misuse of tax dollars, particularly when evaluated through the lens of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, which protects citizens from having their property taken without just compensation. The Fifth Amendment explicitly states, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." While this clause is often invoked in cases of eminent domain, when the government seizes private property for public use, it also has broader implications for the use of taxpayer dollars. Tax revenue, after all, is derived from the property and labor of individuals and represents a form of collective resource owned by the citizenry. When these funds are transferred to private corporations, the question arises, what constitutes just compensation to the taxpayers who provided those funds? One of the central critiques of corporate subsidies is that taxpayers often receive no direct or meaningful compensation for their contributions. While proponents of subsidies argue that these funds promote economic growth, create jobs, and stimulate innovation, the reality is more complex. For compensation to be just, it must equitably benefit the taxpayers who provided the funding. However, corporate subsidies often fail this test for several reasons. Proponents frequently claim that subsidies create jobs and stimulate the economy, but corporations are under no legal obligation to provide job security to employees. The primary legal and fiduciary duty of corporations is to maximize shareholder value. This duty creates a structural limitation that prioritizes the financial interests of shareholders, particularly the board of directors and the CEO, over the welfare of employees and the broader public. In practice, this means that even when subsidies are provided with the intent of preserving or creating jobs, companies may lay off workers, outsource jobs, or use automation to cut costs if these actions align with shareholder interests. By law, corporate governance structures prioritize the distribution of profits, and by extension, any financial windfalls such as government subsidies, to shareholders and executives. This dynamic undermines the notion that subsidies benefit the broader public. For example, if a corporation receives a $500 million subsidy intended to promote job growth, a significant portion of that money may be allocated to executive bonuses, stock buybacks, or dividend payments, leaving only a fraction for operational expansion or workforce development. Unlike public programs or infrastructure projects, which provide tangible and broadly distributed benefits, corporate subsidies often lack transparency and accountability. Taxpayers rarely have a say in how these funds are allocated or whether they achieve their stated goals. This disconnect raises concerns about the legitimacy of using public funds to support private enterprises without clear mechanisms for ensuring public benefit. To understand why corporate subsidies are problematic, it is important to examine the role of corporations in society. Corporations are private entities established to generate profit. While they contribute to economic activity and provide goods and services, their legal structure is inherently designed to prioritize the interests of shareholders. This focus on shareholder value creates a conflict of interest when corporations receive public funds. Government subsidies blur the line between public and private interests. Ideally, public funds should be used to promote the general welfare, as outlined in the Constitution's preamble. However, when these funds are directed toward corporations, they often serve to enrich a narrow group of stakeholders rather than the broader population. This dynamic raises fundamental questions about the fairness and efficacy of such policies. Another significant concern regarding corporate subsidies is the potential for politicians to profit from their allocation. Politicians, as public officials, have access to insider knowledge about which companies are likely to receive subsidies. By investing in these corporations before subsidies are announced, they can capitalize on the resulting stock price increases or enhanced profitability of these companies. This practice, while not always illegal, raises serious ethical questions. Politicians are expected to act in the public interest, but their ability to profit personally from subsidy decisions creates a conflict of interest. For example, if a politician invests in a renewable energy company knowing that it will receive a substantial government grant, they stand to benefit financially at the taxpayer's expense. Moreover, this dynamic undermines public trust in the integrity of subsidy programs. When the public perceives that subsidies are being allocated based on political favoritism or self-interest rather than objective criteria, it erodes confidence in government institutions. To address this issue, stricter regulations on conflicts of interest and enhanced transparency in subsidy decisions are necessary. An often overlooked aspect of government subsidies is the implicit requirement for these funds to deliver returns that exceed alternative investment strategies. For corporations, especially their board of directors and CEOs, subsidies must generate greater financial rewards than the company would achieve by investing the same funds in low-risk financial instruments such as certificates of deposit or CDs, which currently offer returns of approximately 5.6% on a quarterly basis. This reality imposes a hidden standard. Any subsidy must effectively enrich executives and principal shareholders beyond what would be considered a safe, predictable investment. Boards and executives, who have fiduciary duties to maximize shareholder value, will naturally assess the opportunity cost of accepting government funds. If subsidies do not promise returns exceeding the 5.6% benchmark, they may be deemed inefficient from the perspective of corporate governance. This expectation exacerbates the misalignment between public and private interests. Instead of prioritizing broader societal benefits, such as job creation or environmental improvements, corporations focus on structuring the use of subsidies to ensure substantial financial gains for their leadership. This approach often results in the diversion of funds toward executive bonuses, stock buybacks, or other mechanisms that inflate shareholder value without delivering meaningful benefits to taxpayers or employees. Several high-profile examples illustrate the problematic nature of corporate subsidies. In 2018, Amazon launched a highly publicized search for a second headquarters, ultimately selecting New York City and Arlington, Virginia. The company was promised billions of dollars in tax incentives and subsidies by state and local governments, ostensibly to create jobs and spur economic development. However, critics argued that Amazon's presence would exacerbate issues such as housing affordability and income inequality while providing insufficient benefits to local communities. Public backlash eventually led to Amazon withdrawing its plans for the New York location. The fossil fuel industry receives billions of dollars in subsidies annually, despite its role in contributing to climate change. These subsidies often support established, highly profitable companies rather than fostering innovation or transitioning to renewable energy. Taxpayers effectively subsidize pollution while receiving little in return in terms of long-term economic or environmental benefits. During the 2008 financial crisis, the U.S. government provided massive bailouts to banks and financial institutions deemed too big to fail. While these bailouts may have stabilized the economy in the short term, they also underscored the moral hazard of using public funds to rescue private entities. Many of the rescued banks later reported record profits and paid substantial bonuses to executives, sparking outrage over the perceived lack of accountability and fairness. The allocation of public funds to corporations raises significant legal and ethical questions. The Fifth Amendment's Just Compensation Clause implies that taxpayers are entitled to fair returns on their contributions. However, the current system of corporate subsidies often violates this principle by failing to provide equitable benefits to the public. Moreover, the concentration of subsidy benefits among shareholders and executives exacerbates economic inequality. When public funds are used to enrich the wealthiest segments of society, the social contract between citizens and their government is undermined. This dynamic not only erodes trust in public institutions but also perpetuates systemic inequities. Some critics and theorists speculate that corporate subsidies may serve purposes beyond their publicly stated goals, suggesting that a deep state or shadow government organization could be orchestrating their allocation for ulterior motives. Among these theories is the possibility that subsidies are being channeled to corporations controlled by the wealthy elite and politically connected individuals to fund the construction of secret shelters or infrastructure designed to protect themselves in the event of catastrophic global events, such as a volcanic apocalypse. Proponents of this theory argue that the significant resources involved in subsidy programs, coupled with their lack of transparency, create opportunities for clandestine projects. For example, large-scale subsidies to industries like construction, technology, or defense could potentially mask investments in underground bunkers, advanced survival technologies, or logistical networks intended for exclusive use by an elite group. The lack of accountability and transparency in subsidy allocations fuels these suspicions. Taxpayers are often left in the dark about how their money is used, which can lead to speculation about secretive and self-serving activities by those in power. The intersection of corporate subsidies, governmental oversight, and shadow organizations presents fertile ground for speculative analysis. If a deep state or shadow government were to manipulate report data concerning corporate subsidies, they could create a facade of accountability while secretly diverting funds to clandestine projects serving a privileged elite. A shadow organization intent on manipulating corporate subsidy data would likely employ a multi-tiered strategy, leveraging both technological and bureaucratic means to obscure its true activities. Shadow organizations could establish a network of shell corporations ostensibly engaged in research, infrastructure, or disaster preparedness. These entities would apply for corporate subsidies under legitimate-sounding projects, such as renewable energy development or public safety infrastructure. Advanced data manipulation tools could be used to falsify financial reports and performance metrics. For example, software embedded in government auditing systems might auto-generate plausible data points to align with stated project goals while hiding the reallocation of funds. By selectively releasing data to oversight bodies and the public, shadow organizations could maintain the appearance of transparency. Independent audits would be carefully staged, using redacted or fabricated records to ensure alignment with official narratives. Members of oversight agencies could be co-opted through financial incentives or threats, ensuring complicity. Ethical violations might be concealed under layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. To rationalize the diversion of subsidies into survival bunkers, the shadow organization would need to frame the project within socially palatable terms. These justifications might include national security initiatives, climate change mitigation, or emergency preparedness programs. In this scenario, the premise of a forthcoming volcanic apocalypse provides a compelling backdrop for the urgency of such covert actions. Catastrophic volcanic activity, capable of triggering prolonged global cooling and food shortages, could be forecasted through classified scientific data. The shadow organization might exploit this information to justify the covert allocation of resources to protect a select few. To maintain the illusion of accountability, the shadow organization would publicize a few highly visible and successful projects funded by corporate subsidies to demonstrate effectiveness, use media manipulation and disinformation campaigns to discredit whistleblowers or independent investigators, and periodically release sanitized reports that include enough verifiable data to satisfy cursory inspections while hiding deeper malfeasance. The inherent structure of corporations, which prioritizes shareholder value, creates a misalignment between public funds and public benefit. The alignment of technological sophistication, bureaucratic complexity, and social engineering would enable such an operation to thrive, particularly under the guise of addressing existential threats.
Governments often give money to corporations. This money is called a subsidy. Subsidies aim to help businesses grow. They can also encourage innovation. Governments use them to achieve specific goals. These goals might include creating jobs or protecting the environment. Subsidies come in many forms. They can be direct payments to companies. They can also be tax breaks or low-interest loans. The idea is to give these businesses an advantage. This advantage is supposed to benefit everyone eventually. However, subsidies are not without controversy. Critics argue they are a misuse of taxpayer money. They question if the benefits outweigh the costs. This is where the debate heats up. Those who support subsidies point to their potential benefits. They argue subsidies can boost economic growth. They can lead to job creation and technological advancements. Supporters say these benefits trickle down to the public. However, critics are quick to point out the downsides. They argue that subsidies often fail to deliver on their promises. Companies may take the money and run. They might not create the promised jobs. Worse, they might even lay off workers. Another concern is that subsidies primarily benefit the wealthy. Corporations may use the money to line the pockets of executives and shareholders. This happens instead of investing in workers or research and development. Corporations are in business to make money. This is their primary goal. While they contribute to the economy, their focus on profits can create conflicts. This is especially true when they receive public funds. When corporations receive subsidies, they are essentially getting a helping hand, but critics argue there's no guarantee this help will be used as intended. Companies are obligated to their shareholders, not to the public. This raises questions about accountability. Taxpayers have little say in how subsidies are used. There is often a lack of transparency. This makes it difficult to track whether subsidies are actually benefiting the public. The debate over corporate subsidies highlights a crucial issue: the use of public funds. When taxpayers' money is at stake, transparency is paramount. The public has a right to know how their money is being spent. There needs to be greater accountability. Clear metrics are needed to measure the effectiveness of subsidies. We need to see if they are achieving their intended goals. If they're not, we need to rethink them. Ultimately, the question is, are subsidies a good investment? Or are they a form of corporate welfare that benefits the few at the expense of the many? These are questions that demand careful consideration and open debate.